Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another video. If you haven't watched my last video, this is the UFC version of 10 fights in which I want to see in 2025. Of course, this is my personal opinion. I've done a boxing version just yesterday, so if you're into boxing and you want to know my thoughts, then go and have a watch of that, a view of that. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like the video if you do indeed like the video, and I suppose let's get straight into it. Obviously, like I say, this is the now third year in which I have done this, and every time Jones has been the headline, he's been the thumbnail, he's been the main kind of fight, the main kind of attention. And to be honest, I mean, this year is no different as well. Jon Jones has had another great year, to be fair, and coming off an excellent victory versus Miocic in a fight in which, you know, it took a little bit of time to be made, and obviously Jones got the injury, and there was frustrations around having to wait for him again. But whenever he makes you wait, he comes back and he looks better than ever. And to be honest, that was a very good performance, a performance in which he showed pretty much every skill in which you can in each round. It looked like he was fighting a different style, a different way. He was trying to showcase a different skill of his, and of course, he then went on to stop eventually Miocic, and Miocic, a legend of the UFC heavyweight division, and was sad to see him retire, but he did take a beating from Jones and was completely outdone. And Jones versus Aspinall, of course, is the fight in which I want for 2025. There is, of course, still Jones versus Ngannou. I believe that was the fight in which I said 2 years ago that I wanted to see happen, Jones versus Ngannou, but obviously everything's happened with Ngannou since then. He's moved on, he's had fights in boxing, he's had then the success in the PFL and beaten Renan Ferreira. Of course, us as fans, we'd still love to see Jones versus Ngannou, but I think it is becoming less likely each year because of course, Ngannou being with the PFL not really working with the UFC, and I don't think Ngannou is too keen to work with the UFC after what Dana White said and the way that it's kind of all ended up with them. So, like I say, it seems like that fight is becoming less and less likely. It seems like Ngannou wants to get back into boxing, to be honest, and I don't know necessarily where he's going to go next, but for the moment, Jones versus Aspinall is getting bigged up more and more. Obviously there was so much talk about it in the build-up to the Miocic fight. Jones was fed up of answering questions and even didn't do interviews because he was thinking that questions were going to get asked about the Aspinall fight. He has gone now from saying that he will not take the fight no matter what and doesn't care for Aspinall as a fight to now saying that he will take it for the right price. That means the UFC are probably going to throw a lot of money. This could be the most expensive fight for the UFC to ever make, but it could be the biggest fight in the UFC ever, especially in the UFC heavyweight division. When you think about big matchups. There's been standout stars, but there's not been something built up like this where you've had a name like Jon Jones as as big of a name as him fights for a heavyweight title, and Aspinall has really built up his brand and staked to his claim, and he is deserving of this shot. He is deserving of this chance. He hasn't been so outwardly spoken where it's been too much, it's been cringe or anything like that. He's kind of said, he said, "Why are you ducking me?" But he's tried to be relatively respectful. But I do actually think there is a bit of a disliking, or at least from Jones' side now, towards Aspinall. And so it is, again, perhaps that's just Jones selling the fight more, but it is, like I say, a fight in which is so big at the moment and so been so built up. Everybody wants to see it. And I'm one of them people. I think, of course, it would, in my opinion, be the biggest fight in the UFC currently. I think it would be the biggest fight of 2025 if it is to happen. Dana White has said that it is 100% happening. Perhaps he's spoken too soon. If things do fall out money-wise, I'm sure the UFC will probably go out and say why and go out and say what's been happening. But it seems all kind of ticked off, signed off on Aspinall's side. It's just getting Jones to get everything agreed. So if Dana White's saying 100%, then perhaps we'll see it. Hopefully, at the start of 2025, or in the springtime. Maybe not. Maybe we might have to wait until the summer, even the winter of 2025. But it is the fight to make in the heavyweight division. The heavyweight division is quite stale at the moment, to be completely honest. We're seeing the likes of Curtis Blades, who, of course, is coming off that loss to Aspinall. It was a bad loss. Aspinall did very well to kind of avenge the loss on his record, which was, of course, the injury, to then be able to brutally stop Curtis Blades in a fight in which I don't think anybody realistically thought would have ended in the first round. But Blades is now fighting a guy who's just coming off the Contender Series. So when you see him fights like that in the heavyweight division, it just shows, like I say, it's in a weak spot at the moment. I mean, Gane is looking. I mean, he's coming off quite a lackluster performance versus Volkov. Volkov, of course, had a good year last year, but of course, then technically lost versus Gane. And so, you look at other names. Pavlovich isn't really a name he's fighting on the Adesanya card, but it's just not really, going to get him back into it again. He's kind of dropped off a bit. You kind of look around, like Jelton Almeida isn't selling. He isn't as big of a name because he has, the wrestling. Perhaps he's a bit of a tougher test, but he's just not going to bring the eyes, bring the entertainment, and I don't think he's quite done enough to really earn himself that position as of yet. So, like I say, there's not really many other things going on in the heavyweight division. And when you think of the heavyweight division in any combat sport, you need to have them standout fights, them standout stars, these big fights. It's always been the biggest division in which everybody's cared about. This is the fight to make, and hopefully we'll see it. And then, I'd still love to see the winner of that go up against Ngannou. Like I say, we'll have to wait and see. Perhaps it could be Pereira. The winner of that could go up against Pereira at the end of the year. Jones might retire if he beats Aspinall, or if he loses. I don't know, there's so many things that could happen, and it's Aspinall's rise, in which has been so interesting to see and so great to see as a fan of British MMA, British fighters. We haven't had this clear UFC champion in the heavyweight division, and from, of course, England, and it's just, like I say, excellent to see. It's something in which we're all very fond of, and we're all really getting behind him as a fighter. And yeah, that was just my first pick. Sorry to go on so much about that. But second pick, Pantoja versus Mokaev. I still think there is a possibility this could happen. Obviously, it seems unlikely. Mokaev was cut from the UFC, perhaps unfairly. I mean, Dana White pretty much only just said that he was just tough to work with. Does that mean that he should have been kicked out of the UFC cut? Depends how difficult to work with, I suppose. And it was just weird to see how he was cut, and he was on such a good run. He was really looking impressive. He beat Manuel Cape, and that was a good win. It was a bit of a lackluster fight for the build-up, but it was a very good win to get. And so to go on to then fight, to then get cut, it was, like I say, a big surprise. And in a flyweight division in which is literally bringing people in just to, create new names, have new fighters involved. They're literally just bringing in champions from other organisations because there isn't them names there available to fight, or that are going to really sell fights. Pantoja is running out of options, and Cape is fighting Royval. They're talking about the winner of that going to fight Pantoja. If Royval's to win again, then I'm sure people don't really care too much for that fight for Royval Pantoja again. If Cape is to win, then Mokaev beat Cape. So, like I say, it's just, why don't bring Mokaev back? I mean, he went away, he fought in another organisation, he got a first round submission victory. He is an excellent fighter. If he's difficult to work with, then perhaps you've got to give a little bit more money to the flyweight division to make a fight like this. If he builds himself outside of the UFC, continues to win, has a couple more first round wins, then you pretty much have to. There's no reason as to why not to put him in for a world title fight versus Pantoja. And so hopefully, if that is to happen, that's a fight in which personally I want to see happen, I think should happen, and I think it's the best for the division for it to happen. But like I say, we'll have to wait and see. Pantoja is on such a tear, he's had such a great year, and I mean, he's just beaten in impressive fashion Asakura, and so he's, like I say, on a great run, and he's doing great things. And so hopefully we'll see Pantoja versus Mokaev maybe on the latter side of 2025. Moving on to my third fight, and this is the winner of, so Strickland versus Du Plessis, the rematch, the winner of that, to face Chimaev. I think everybody's expecting that to happen and everybody's wanting that to happen. Chimaev might literally just wait around to get that fight, and to be completely honest, you don't blame him. I mean, he had the fight versus Usman, and he didn't look bad in that, but it wasn't the lightning fast, electric Chimaev, because he got into the later rounds and he seemed to struggle, and it perhaps slowed the kind of hype about him because everybody was just really loving the early stoppages and the early wins. Then that Usman fight, like I say, slowed him down a bit and made people question if he could go the 5 round distance. And of course, he had some illnesses as well and some issues that were making him struggle to get back into the cage. But he then went to fight Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker was on a great run and he was really looking like he was staking a claim for another title shot. But Chimaev just dismantled him. 1st round submission of the year, in my opinion. Just, I mean, pushed his teeth back. It's a brutal submission. It's world class, and he is deserving of a world title shot. You know, Strickland is also deserving of a world title shot, and was very frustrated to see people even saying that Chimaev should jump in front of Strickland to fight Du Plessis. I respect that, and I'm glad, to be honest, that they are making the rematch between the two of them, because it was a very good close fight the first time. So, you know, of course, the winner of that, if it is in a dominant fashion by either of them, then they probably will just go on to fight Chimaev. If it's another close fight, perhaps it'll be a trilogy, but I still think either way, the winner of that is going to fight Chimaev, and it just makes complete sense. You know, Chimaev has now seemingly found the weight in which he can make and is best comfortable making, and he's become a bit more seemingly respectful on the mic, which is interesting to see. But like I say, that's the fight in which in the middleweight division makes the most sense at the moment. Moving on now to my 4th fight, Pereira versus Ankalaev. Pereira coming off an excellent year, a year in which he staked a claim to be fighter of the year. You know, it was between him and Topuria, to be completely honest, but he came off 3, you know, just great stoppages. Perhaps had a bit of a tougher test versus Roundtree than he expected, but nonetheless, this fight is the only fight realistically left in the light heavyweight division for him. He said that he's fighting again soon. Well, I don't know if he said it, but it was similar to what I've seen. He's fighting again soon, and it's not meant to be against Ankalaev. Not too sure who it's going to be against. You know, you look down the light heavyweight division, he's pretty much beaten everybody. I mean, Blachowicz is fighting Ulberg, which is a great fight, but kind of stops Ulberg as a possible opponent. Prochazka's fighting Hill, so that stops them two as possible opponents. So I'm not too sure who he could be fighting, if he is now moving up to heavyweight or if he's welcoming up a middleweight. I'm not too sure. But this Ankalaev fight is the fight that makes sense. You know, Ankalaev has put himself into the position where he is the top contender, perhaps because he isn't the most entertaining to watch, and perhaps some of his performances haven't been excellent. I mean, the win versus Rakic wasn't a crazily good performance. It was surprising to see the way that he fought that fight, because he didn't really go for any kind of ground attempts, wrestling attempts to get Rakic down, and that was what everybody was kind of branding Ankalaev as, the guy who can wrestle, the guy who can take Pereira to the ground and make it difficult for him that way. Pereira, I'm not too sure if he really wants to fight, if that is, you know, what Ankalaev is being branded as. But I just don't know if Ankalaev's, you know, really state that claim to be entertaining enough for the fans to watch. But in the way of the rankings, he's there. He's the top contender. He should fight Pereira next, and that's the fight in which does make sense. Pereira has said that he's not ready to move up to the heavyweight division as of yet, and I'm sure he'd probably want to just wait and see for the Jones-Aspinall result, because he might be able to slide in as the next opponent. So I'm not too sure where he's going to go, but in my opinion, it should be the Ankalaev fight next. Moving on to my 5th fight, and I've gone with a bit of a rogue shout. 2 guys who are coming off losses, perhaps not really had the best of 2024s, but O'Malley versus Cejudo. I think as a rivalry between the two of them just not really liking each other, there's been a bit of a build-up for a while where Cejudo has, you know, said things when O'Malley's been in interviews and things like that. It's had a bit of a fire between the two of them. I think it's a fight in which, in the bantamweight division, I want to see. Obviously, we have for the belt Dvalishvili versus Nurmagomedov. If there was, 10 fights that I wanted and that fight wasn't announced, then I would have definitely said Nurmagomedov versus Dvalishvili, because I think it is an excellent fight and I can't wait to see it. But obviously that fight's been announced and that's happening soon. So when you look elsewhere in the bantamweight division for entertainment-wise matchups, I want O'Malley versus Cejudo. I think that is a great fight. Like I say, a rivalry between the two of them. Cejudo's talked about going down in weight and fighting for the belt in the flyweight. Perhaps that could happen. But Cejudo, he's coming off 2 defeats, so there's not really too many guys I'm sure are going to be too quick to fight him, and are really seeing much point in fighting him. And to be honest, I think it's going to be very difficult for him to be able to get down to the flyweight division. But I think that fight versus O'Malley could happen. I think it could make sense. I think it could happen. And Cejudo has pretty much said the main fight in the bantamweight division he would want would be O'Malley. O'Malley has said that he's going to have time out, and so we're not too sure how long he's going to take time out wise. He said about 12 months, but that was after the defeat, and so by the latter stages of next year or even summertime in 2025, I mean, he definitely could have a fight there with Cejudo, and two guys coming off losses, why not? That'd be a great fight to make, in my opinion. I think it would have a very entertaining build-up. Moving on to my 6th fight, I've got Harrison versus Pena. First women's fight. I think it's the fight in which is going to happen. It makes sense. It's been built up correctly, and it's going to happen. Harrison came into the UFC this year, had a great debut in the UFC, destroyed Holly Holm, then moved on, had another fight, looked good in that fight as well. She's definitely staked a claim for herself as a top contender. Pena is coming off the wins in which he's had this year. She's looked, pretty good. She had the fight versus Pennington, which was quite a close fight to be fair, but she looked good in that fight enough to win. Obviously, she's coming off the loss versus Nunes before that, but reclaimed back her belt versus Pena. Harrison have been going back and forth with Pena. I think it's a fight that makes sense. It's going to have a bit of an interesting build-up, and it's probably going to happen. And like I say, it makes sense. I mean, Harrison has been moved quick in the UFC, but that's no surprise, really. PFL champion, Olympic gold medalist, 2-time Olympic gold medalist. She's deserving to have moved quite quickly, and this is a fight in which, like I say, is expected to happen, her to be progress quickly and to have a great fight. And she's definitely going to be a tough test for Pena, and perhaps is the toughest contender in the whole of the division, to be honest. I don't think there is many other fighters that could really deal with Harrison in the division at the moment, but of course she has to prove it by winning the belt. Moving on to my 7th position now, 7th fight, Topuria versus Lopez. Topuria, like I said before, has basically, him versus Pereira has been the debate for Fighter of the Year. Topuria's come in and stopped 2 pretty much Hall of Fame fighters. I mean, former champion in Volkanovski and former champion in Max Holloway. Max Holloway coming off the high he was on after the Gaethje win, and Volkanovski coming off defeats, but still, the champion in the featherweight division before that. And so it's now Topuria's reign. Topuria has been talked about going and fighting Volkanovski again. I wouldn't mind that fight. I think it's a fight in which, for Volkanovski, I love Volkanovski as a fighter, but I think for his legacy, he is probably deserving the rematch versus Topuria because of what he did achieve in the featherweight division. But as a top contender, even if it's the next fight along, Lopez has deserved to fight for the title this year. He's had a great year, coming off some very impressive victories, some high altitude victories. I think he's the only person who could perhaps match the aggression and just really come forwards towards Topuria and make it difficult for him in that way. Topuria has talked about going up and fighting Makhachev. I just don't think that's going to happen as of yet. Topuria, I don't think, has done quite enough to go straight to a belt. He's also talked about going and fighting one of the top contenders in the lightweight division. Perhaps that could happen, but I personally would like to see, before he does anything like that, him to get rid of all the contenders, and he hasn't done that yet. Lopez is the clear kind of top contender, so that's the fight in which I would like to see. Topuria versus Lopez, I think it's 2 guys in which definitely could make for an entertaining matchup. Moving on to my 8th fight now, that being Shevchenko versus Fiorot. I think it's a fight in which makes sense. I mean, when you look at the rankings, it makes sense and it should happen. Fiorot had a great victory versus Blanchfield, to be honest, where she really just shut Blanchfield out and made Blanchfield look very poor, and she just showed her strength and her superior ability in that aspect to be able to just shut out Blanchfield completely. Shevchenko is coming off that win versus Grasso, which was definitely an avenged win, that clear unanimous decision win in which she wanted after the first fight between the two of them. So, or the last fight between the two of them where it ended in a draw. So this fight is definitely the one that makes sense. I think Fury's had to wait and has been sat patiently waiting for this opportunity versus Shevchenko. But I think now this is her time to be able to push in. And I think with the strength and the size of Fury, she could definitely make it difficult for Shevchenko and could be a tough test for her. Shevchenko looked very good realistically against Grasso and really did show her skills and is a very, very talented fighter who has been a great champion. But Fiore is going to be coming in as this new name, this top contender who's, a bit of an unknown still realistically. Like I say, other than that Blanchfield fight, a little bit of an unknown. And that could headline a UFC France, a UFC Paris card. I'm not too sure, but yeah, nonetheless, that is a great fight in my opinion to make. And moving on now to my ninth fight. This is another one where it's a bit like something needs to happen before the fight is actually able to be made. That is Ditcheva versus Blanchfield. Blanchfield obviously had that loss versus Fiore, like I mentioned, but she then went on to fight Namajunas, and perhaps it wasn't the most craziest of fights, but she looked a lot better, and Namajunas was on a very good run, and she did very well to stop that and to be able to win. So she then cemented herself back as another top contender in the division. Ditcheva has been on a great knockout run in the PFL. She's, I believe, had 3 knockouts in a row and is looking excellent. She won the $1 million tournament, and she looked excellent. And she, as a British fighter, is another fighter in which I'm supporting. But I think the UFC and Dana White are really going to be looking at her, and perhaps if she's able to win one more big fight in the PFL, or she's warranted to go into the UFC straight away. Is she going to accept that? I'm not too sure because she's making good money with the PFL and she has probably a contract there. But the UFC, I'm sure, are going to be sniffing around and hoping to, tempt her over. A fight versus Blanchfield would make sense. It would be a top contender who, did suffer a defeat not too long ago, but is a very good way to get into the rankings at a high position. Then if Shevchenko Fiore happens, then Ditcheva comes in if she beats Blanchfield to then fight the winner of that. I think that makes sense. I think it's great. I would love to see, of course, Ditcheva come to the UFC to be really tested. We'll just have to wait and see. Obviously, like I say, that thing has to happen first, where the UFC actually offer the contract, offer the deal. So hopefully it will happen, and I think, she's been a standout star of 2024, Ditcheva, and so hopefully she's able to progress that into the UFC for this year. Moving on now to my 10th and final fight. This a bit of a fun one for me, but another fighter in which has had another really good standout year against a former top world champion, being Buckley versus Usman. I think it's a great fight. I think Buckley, obviously, he's been on a great run this year. He moved down into the welterweight division, and he's been pretty much unstoppable, to be honest. I mean, he fought Wonderboy Thompson. Well, he's fought 4 times this year. He fought Vicente Luque. Can't remember the name of the second guy. He fought Wonderboy Thompson, and now he's just fought Covington as well. So four fights, 3 stoppage victories. He's literally had a very good standout year, breakout year where he's really become back as a great name and really cemented himself in the division. And from the performances, from his performance versus Covington, he looked very good. I'd say he pretty much shut out Covington, stopped pretty much most of his wrestling attempts, perhaps was slowing down a little bit into the latter part of the fight before it got stopped. But still, he looked very impressive, and I think if he's maybe able to improve his gas tank, he could definitely go into a 5-round fight versus Usman, who obviously is coming off a loss versus Chimaev and is coming off, recent losses to Leon Edwards as well, and is waiting seemingly around for him to be 100%. He said he'll fight anybody when he's feeling 100%. The Jack Della Maddalena fight has been talked about for him for a while, so perhaps that might happen first. Buckley might have to fight Ian Gary, which was already scheduled before Covington came in, but perhaps that might have to happen, and he has to beat then Ian Gary, which is a tough test. But I just think stylistic wise, it'd be just two strong guys going at it, and Usman's wrestling will definitely test Buckley's ability. Two powerful punches as well. I think it would just be an excellent fight to make in the welterweight division. Is looking very stacked at the moment. Of course, you have Buckley, Usman, Della Maddalena, Covington still around, Burns still around. You have, of course, Leon Edwards, you have Sean Brady, you have Bilal Muhammad, you have Rakhmonov. You have a lot of great names about. Just this as a little fight would be one in which I'd be very interested in. I think could definitely headline like a UFC fight night and be a great fight. I feel like it kind of has to be a 5 round fight, and I'm sure Usman, after the last fight versus Chimaev, will be really wanting a 5 round fight as well. But yeah, I think that would be an excellent fight to make. And so yeah, that is it. That is my 10 UFC fights. Let me know if I've missed any that you would have on. Let me know if I've got any wrong, I suppose, or if you change any of them around. And yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like video if you did need like video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.